friends, Jerry Rosa here in the Rosa Stringworks workshop. We're about to get started on building this custom guitar, and based on the response from the intro video, this is highly anticipated and going to be highly watched. So with that knowledge, I'd like to just say a few caveats up front here, and try to keep this in mind throughout the whole video series, however long it turns out to be. And that is that every single thing you see on these videos, and it goes for all my past videos too, is just simply how I do it. It's just how I do it. It's the way I've created over the years. It works for me. It's just something that I know will work, and that's why I do it that way. I am not saying ever that it's the only way to do something. I am not saying ever it's the way you should do something. Your results might vary widely, okay? So I just want to make that very clear up front. Now I know throughout this series I'm going to get a million suggestions, comments that says, you shouldn't do it that way, you should do it this way because this is the way I do it. Well, fine, if it works for you, feel free and do it that way. I got no problem with that. I do it this way. It's not that I'm being stubborn and that I won't change. Lots of people do offer suggestions, and when the suggestion is offered in the right manner and it makes sense to me, by gosh, I'll try it and see if it works for me. And let me give you a case in point. I often use the back edge of my X-Acto knife as a scraper, especially in tight cracks. Well, one guy suggested that I use the this perforated drywall sanding stuff. It's like a screen. It's got abrasion on both sides. He says he sticks it in there and he holds the crack shut and pulls it out. Hey, it's not a bad idea. It's got abrasive on both sides, and it will make both sides real smooth. Now the only problem with that could be with, a lot of these cracks are so tight, I don't know if I could even get that in there, but certainly I will try that. Those are the kind of good suggestions that I like to see. So thank you for that suggestion, whoever that was. And I don't mind suggestions, don't get me wrong. It's just that, if you make suggestions, think about what you're suggesting. Some of the suggestions I get are pretty far out and or dangerous, and to the instrument. So, enough said about all that. The point I'm making is there's a million ways to do everything. I am just choosing to do everything the way I do it because it works for me. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it this way, or that it's the only, and it certainly doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. Please keep that in mind. Thank you very much. Let's get started. Friends, one of the very first things we're going to have to do on this guitar build is join these two pieces of this top together. Now before we do that, I want to get them to the proper thickness. The best way to get something this thin to the proper thickness, in my opinion, is with a sander rather than a planer. Under ideal conditions, if you had the perfect planer, then planing it would make a lot of sense. But I don't have that perfect planer. So the best job for me would be to use a thickness sander. The first thing I'm going to do is, test this thickness sander to make sure that it's accurate. Because I have a feeling it's not. I have never really, I calibrated when I first got it, but I don't use it that often. And I know it's not perfect from this side to this side. In other words, this side might be thicker than this side when you get done sanding something. So that's what we're going to test right now. Off camera, I've already sanded this, and I've got very coarse paper on here, by the way, right now. So that's not going to work either, but that's a different issue. But let's just see where we're at right now. I've been careful to keep this in the same orientation. It's 793.5 thousandths. So let's see where we're at here. It's only 720 or 718 thousandths on this side. So it's quite a bit thicker here than it is over there. I want to get this thing within a couple of thousandths if possible. I know that's very difficult to do on woodworking equipment, but I'm going to try. I'm going to do some adjustments on this, and we're going to test it to make sure it's planing flat. because when you're planing a board down to 100,000ths of an inch, which is 1/10 of an inch, for my good friends out there in millimeter land, that would be about 2.5 millimeters. So roughly, you could be, if you're off by 10,000ths of an inch, that's quite a bit. So because it really exaggerates especially when you get the wider top on here. So anyway, the bottom line is we're going to try to calibrate this machine. I'm going to do most of that off camera, but I will show you what I'm doing as I get it all figured out. I've been finagling off screen, and I've got it closer. This side now is 655 thousandths. This side is 646 thousandths. So that's 9 thousandths off. That's about 2 human hairs. That doesn't seem like much. But still, 9 thousandths on 100 thousandths is 10%. So I'm trying to get it closer yet. Well, I won't tell you it was easy, because it wasn't, but I monkeyed with this quite a bit, and I think I've got it within 4 thousandths from one side to the other. And I've tested on a couple of pieces of wood, and it seems to measure fairly consistently that way. 4 thousandths is still off, obviously, but 4 thousandths isn't much. Like if you run the board through one way and you turn the board around the other way on the same, without adjusting anything, then you've really cut that down to 2 thousandths of an inch between one side to the other. So that's acceptable. 2 thousandths of an inch is really hardly measurable. So there we go. It's as good as I can get it. It's as close as I can get it before we start planing these top boards. When I put the dust collection system in and connected up this sander, I knew I wasn't going to have a lot of room behind it, and most of the time it's not a problem because I'm running through little short parts all the time. But in this case, I'm running through a lot longer piece, so I've got this cattywampus through the wall so that I have clearance to get through. You want to make sure you always have clearance before you start something like this. So here we go. We're going to run this thing through one time and see where we're at. This is the thicker of the two pieces. We're going to start on it. I have very fine sandpaper on here this first, for this top. I would say the sandpaper I have on there is about 120 or 130, somewhere in there. Maybe 150. So it's pretty fine for a sander like this. Throughout this build, I'm going to be showing you how I start something, and if it's a repetitive task, I'm just going to fast forward through it or just skip it altogether after you've seen the process. That's the case here. I'm just running these through, The only important thing that I think, besides obviously checking the thickness quite often because you don't want to overshoot it, but the only other obvious thing that you should do, to me, is you run it through this way, you flip it that way, and you run it through again. And that way, if the planer is off just a little bit, that at least your outside edges will be exactly the same, and your hump will be in the middle. And we're only talking 1,000th or 2 of hump if you've got your machine calibrated like I've got this one. So we're not talking like a major hill, but at least your outside edges will be very uniform, and that'll be perfect for your binding. So that's how I do it. That to me is an important factor to flip it. Well, I spent a lot of time sanding these boards down, or thickness sanding them down, and now they're down to 105 thousandths, both of them. And that's in very good shape in my opinion. Now, I think we're going to go check the pattern. We're going to check our pattern to make sure we got plenty of room. But I've noticed there's a tiny inclusion real close to the center line here. And you can see it in the video, I believe. There's a little tiny inclusion. I'm hoping we can plane that out just because I don't like the look of it. It really won't hurt anything. But hopefully we can plane that out and then join it together. So let's see what we can do with that. I think that you can see that we have plenty of room, more than an inch on each side here. So we've got room to plane this down. And so therefore we can get rid of that dark line. I just thought it would be interesting to know that my pattern here was taken from a Martin D28. The serial number on that Martin was 307546. And it belonged to Gene and Walt Henry. Actually, it belonged to their son, who was killed in a car wreck when he was quite young. He was an incredibly good guitar player already, and it's such a shame that he was killed in a car wreck. Just a bit more trivia. Walt Henry was one of the last survivors from the Oklahoma, the battleship that was sunk during Pearl Harbor. He was actually on the battleship and was a war hero. So I hope that information gives just a little bit more meaning to the guitar, because Walt and Gene Henry were wonderful people, and I never met their son, but I did hear his recordings, and he was an incredible guitar player. Maybe his spirit will be in this guitar. Okay, we're going to take some more off of this to get rid of that dark line. Well, I'll be honest, the seam is not perfect. I would like to get it tighter. I can see light coming through it when I hold it up to the outside door there. It's not perfect, but it's really close. So I think I can sand it and make that by hand better, and I think that's what I'm going to do, because sometimes just running it through these things just doesn't work. And in this particular case, I may have to do some more adjustments to this to get it more perfect, but it's pretty close. It's better than the old joiner I had by a long stretch. But we're going to work the rest of it down by hand, and I'll show you how I do that. It just so happens that the joiner table is probably the flattest surface I have in the shop. So, you know, by holding it on here, I can see it's a little tight here, it's a little tight in here, and yet there looks like there's a tiny gap on the end, on both ends, and then right here in the middle. So, I'm going to take this, this is 220, actually it's 320, and I'm going to just work the edges here a little bit. A little bit goes a long way on this kind of thing when you're this close. Yeah, I think that's it. I don't see any light now. Now that's what you want. It's really hard to get that, but that's what you want. You want that joint as tight as it can be. And I believe we got her there now. So I'm real happy with that. Now we're going to show you how we glue that together. Hopefully you can see how I've got this dry fitted. I've got these two boards nailed to the plywood, these two little short boards nailed to the plywood. Everything's tight with this, with the stick under here. Everything's tight. And then I've got a few nails here on this curved part because I couldn't really do much there. And anyway, if I pull this stick out now, and let's just try it, see what happens. You can see it still stands up. It doesn't fall down. But then if you just press down, and I'm hoping it'll go together, it's actually a little bit tight, if anything, but I think that's okay. We'll just make sure we get plenty of flat stuff on here, and I'm glad we did it dry fit it, because it is kind of tight. So probably a 3/4 board would be too tall. This was just a 1/2 inch is what it was. So anyway, we're going to get some flat boards that we can lay on top of this to make sure that it really sits down good and flat when we do squeeze it together like this. I found another piece of plywood that is pretty flat on the back, and it just seems like it's working good, and it just seemed like everything flattened out really good. So that's what we're going to use. The only thing I'm concerned about is gluing the plywood to this, so I'll have to find another piece to put in here, another piece of paper or something.
I normally use wax paper, I just don't happen to have any, so this paper here is kind of a waxy coating. I'm hoping it won't stick too bad. Okay, I believe I've got everything in, all my ducks in a row here, and so, what does ducks in a row mean? I don't know. I guess when you're shooting them, if you just got them all in a row, that'd be easier to shoot. With my ducks in a row, we're about ready to glue this up. So, first thing we got to do is get glue on both of these edges, and as always, you just do it as carefully as you can, and then I'm just looking to see if I've got any drips and just get rid of the extra right now before we put her together. That looks pretty good. So now we'll put it into the jig here. Pull the piece of wood out. Looks real good. We'll squeeze her together. We'll put this piece of wax paper over the top of that. Then we'll put this plywood over the top of that. And now we'll weight this down with paint cans and all kinds of heavy things. And we'll let that set. I'm going to let it go ahead and set overnight because we've got all of it airtight. You know, it's kind of closed up because of all the paper and everything, so the air can't get to it all that well. I'm going to let it set 24 hours. And just for the record, that's what it looks like with everything piled on top of there. Keep in mind, everything's piled on the plywood, so it's sandwiched between plywood, basically, is what it amounts to. Well, here's the moment of truth. We're going to see if that glued up well, and we're going to take all these cans and everything off of here and see what it looks like. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out quite as good as I was hoping. The paper stuck to it a lot worse than I was expecting. The paper's got a waxy coating, and I thought, well, it wouldn't stick to that, but it did. And so I got to clean all that up. But worse than that, right on the ends here, it's not matched up perfectly. It's just a little bit off. It's not off by much, and up here it's even off a little bit less, a little bit off here, but the rest of it's pretty smooth, pretty flat. Clean this up, analyze it. I'm hoping I can still use the piece. I hope I don't have to scrap this because this is an awesome piece of wood. I've got the carpet off the table here so I can lay this flat. It does lay really good and flat, so that part's good. I'm going to scrape, I've got a flat razor blade, and I'm going to just scrape this joint and see what we got. And I think it's looking pretty good. Well, you see that? See these little spots right here, and right here, and here, and here, and here? Well, you can't say I didn't put my blood, sweat, and tears into this. That's all I got to say about it. Not going to say any more. Oh, man, was that dumb. When you do something dumb, it's dumb. I will just say I was trying to knock the very corners off of the razor blade. That's what I did that was dumb. I won't tell you how I did it. I wanted to knock the corners off so it wouldn't leave any lines down through here as I'm scraping this joint. Washing that off, literally just that little bit has swelled the top of this wood and it's buckled up. So I think I'm going to put some of that same water on the back side here to kind of even it out, because I don't want to get a warp issue going on here. If you're keeping score, it took probably close to 20 minutes before I could get a Band-Aid on it. Why, you ask? Because it kept squirting blood. It's not even that big of a cut. Seriously, it's not that big. It doesn't need stitches, but I bleed easy anyway, and it would not stop bleeding. I mean, even for a split second. It took about 20 minutes before it would stop bleeding enough that I could get a Band-Aid on it. And I had put 2 Band-Aids on it to hold it in 2 different directions. Like I said, you can't say I don't put blood, sweat, and tears into my instruments.
Because I do.
I've got the top cleaned up sufficiently, I think, to know that it's going to work okay. You know, I was a little concerned there because it was a little bit uneven on the very ends, but the board is quite a bit longer than I need, so it's going to work out just fine. I've got it lined up down the center. I've got a center line here. I've got it lined up on my center line, and I'm tracing my pattern around it now. And when I cut this out, I'll be sure to leave a little bit of space even around my pencil mark. I won't cut the pencil mark. I'll leave it and leave a hair around that even, just to make sure that we've got enough room. So there you go. There's our top starting to take some form. We got her sawed out and it looks pretty good. It's good and flat. I'm real happy with that. I just thought I'd point out, as I was sawing around there was too much hanging off, so I just decided to break it on a grain line. And if you will take a look there, you can see that it broke on a grain line. It did not break on the glue line. The glue line is right at the edge of that paper, so it did not break on the glue. So that's why I say, you know, most of the time people cleat things that they don't really need to cleat. If it's glued well, you probably don't need to cleat it unless there's stress on the joint. And in this particular case, I mean, I don't think you could break that at the glue joint if you tried. I really don't. So, pretty sure it would break at another grain line, not at the glue line. But I just thought I'd point that out just to show you how strong it is. It's a very strong joint. We're going to work on cleaning this top up just a little bit. I'm not going to go crazy on it right now, but I'm getting ready to do the rosette, and I want to make sure that it's real good and flat before we do that. Just thought I'd show you the different type of sander that this is. This orbital disc in here vibrates around. This one, I think, I can't even remember now. Let's just look and see what it does. It, amazingly, however they've designed this, it doesn't leave much of a swirl or anything in your thing. It just really sands it smooth, and it doesn't leave any marks. I've tested it on other pieces of wood before, and it works really nice. So I really like this sander, and I'm going to work on this side now a little bit. I think we're going to call that good for now. Just for giggles, I'm just going to check my thickness to see where we're at on the top here now. It should still be right around 100 thousandths. Right on the money according to that. Just a little bit proud of 100 thousandths in most places. Yeah, so we're still a little thick. That's okay. We're going to sand it again after we do the rosette. So that's really working out just about perfect. And boy, it feels smooth and there's nothing to it at all. I've got my rosette center mark right there, and we're going to work on that next. We're not going to be building a super fancy guitar, so it's just going to be a real nice functional style guitar. I've got a rosette that I've had here for quite a while. This is a, I believe it's a Martin style rosette. I'm not even 100% sure. It's got the herringbone design in this area here, as you can see. And then it's got two extra rings. One that goes inside that, and you would leave a little bit of a gap there, and then another one that would go on the outside of it, and you would leave a little bit of a gap. So it's fun to cut all those. When I say fun to cut all those, I really mean it's not fun at all. It's a pain in the neck, actually. But we'll see how we're going to go about that. First thing to do is to decide how big we're making this, because these will expand a little bit. Fretboard extension will come out and cover the upper end of this. So, you know, up here it's not going to be connected, but that's okay. That's just by design. Now I just really have to decide how big we're making it, and you know, I would like the sound hole to be just a hair bigger than average. You know, not a lot bigger, just a little bit bigger, because a little bigger sound hole just gives you a little more punch, I believe.
Well, as sometimes is the case around here, the camera crew, you know, takes a break at a very inopportune time and they miss some of the best footage. And I think this footage wasn't necessarily the best in this particular case, but it was probably me scratching my head deciding how I wanted to cut these Rosette slots. And in the past, I've always cut them on the drill press with a circle cutter. However, the problem with that is two things. Number one, it's dangerous, and number two, it's real dangerous. Those circle cutters are flailing around, and it's just not my favorite tool to use. Not only is it dangerous to me, but it's also dangerous to the top in terms of just ripping it apart. I have had one experience where I did catch a top and screw it up one time. So I've said I'm not using a circle cutter anymore. So now I'm going to take you on a venture on how I'm going to avoid using a circle cutter. I hope you enjoy this little side trip.
We're in the dark side of the shop, which is the metalworking side, and I've decided I'm going to make myself a Rosette cutter for my Dremel tool. I've been always using the drill press in the past to cut out the round circle of the sound hole and the rosette both. But now I've decided I'm going to make myself a Dremel tool Rosette cutter. And so I'm here on the milling machine, and I'm just squaring up some aluminum stock here. That's all I'm doing at the moment. So here we go. This is working out real nice. I'm just making up some square stock that I can screw this to the router base on my router, on my Dremel router. Got this piece of stock squared up pretty well, I believe. The sides here are factory sides. I'm not going to worry about them. This doesn't have to be all that terribly precise. I mean, it's just got to be, you know, I just want it good. And this is plenty good. So I've squared this side to this side here, so they're now perfectly parallel. What we're going to do is we're going to cut a slot through this piece eventually, and we'll have a piece that will slide in and out here to make our different size holes that will slide in and out on the router base. This will be attached to the router base. So right now I don't want to cut that slot yet because I'm not sure how big it's going to be until I square up this little piece. And this is going to be the piece that's going to slide in and out. It's not very big, but you don't need a very big one to route you know, a 4-inch hole. That only takes a 2-inch piece, you know. And you got to keep in mind you're away from the bit. So anyway, make a long story short, this will go all the way up to about a 6-inch hole, I think. We're going to now parallel both these sides because these are the sides that's going to slide through that slot. So I want to get them perfectly parallel. They've just been saw cut at this point. So I'm going to look down them and see which one looks like the straightest saw cut. Looks like maybe this would be the best choice to put down first. We'll flatten this top, turn it over, flatten this one. For those of you who don't know what we're doing here, I have a set of parallels down inside the vise. Parallels are just pieces of metal that you set something on that are parallel to the base of your milling vise. So I've just got those parallels in there, and now my aluminum will set on top of those parallels. In fact, I may have to take one out there. The parallels themselves may be wider than this piece, so I may have to take them back out. Let's see here. Looks like they're probably going to be so I'm only going to be able to use one parallel in there with this. So now you'll see what the parallel looks like. So that's what the parallel is. It just is a parallel piece of metal. You set it down in there, you set something on top of it, and then you tighten your vise up around it. But in this case, this piece is so narrow that two of them won't fit in there. I still got one in there, and now we'll tighten up the vise on this piece. And when you do this, you always tap your piece down to make sure it's good and seated. Got it tapped down in there. We'll tighten up the vise, and now we can just flatten off this piece. This is just a cheapy mill. It's nothing fancy, but it sure is good for a home shop. It's just really awesome for this kind of a shop. Okay, one pass, and that's perfectly flat across there now. We'll take it loose from the vise. The other thing you have to watch on all this kind of work is that you get chips under the piece you're working on, and then that would change your parallel. So I want to make sure it's really clean when I put it back in there. Making sure it's good and tight in there as I tighten up the vise. Now, this should be really close already, but I'm going to take it down just a little bit, just so that we take a little off of there. Okay, so now we have a really nicely milled piece that should be perfectly parallel on both sides. Now, if we put a slot through here with those parallel sides, this should let it slide through there really good and smooth, where it won't be grabbing and pulling and all that. So now it's critical to make a slot in here that will be the width of this and maybe a thousandth over this. So like if this is 250 thousandths, we would probably want a slot that's about 251 or 2 thousandths, just enough to give it some slack to slide through there without any play, but just enough to slide through there. Now, if you really wanted to be very precise, you would use a micrometer. I do have a micrometer, but we don't need to be that precise. So, okay, we've got 376 thousandths, so it's just about 3/8 of an inch. 377 actually, it looks like 377. So our goal is to make a slot that's 377 in this piece here. Now, can we do that? I don't know, but we'll try it. Well, it just so happens my cutter that I was using is a 3/8 cutter, and it just so happens that this is basically 3/8 of an inch wide. However, it's 2 thousandths wider. Well, there might be slop in the cutter, who knows. I'm going to cut a 3/8 slot and see what happens. Now, I wanted to get it roughly in the center of this piece. I did a non-machinist way of doing that by just measuring on both sides, and it came out pretty darn close, within a few thousandths. So, to me, that's close enough for the work we're doing here. If you were really making a precise part, you would do that differently. But we're just doing it as we go here, and so we're making it up as we go, as a matter of fact. Now, what I want to do is I want to lock the carriage so it doesn't go this way. So I'm locking that in under here, and I only want to feed back and forth this way. I'm just doing this by hand because it's so simple and small. I could do a power feed if I needed to. Now we're just, well, actually it fits slightly in there. It kind of goes in the slot, but just barely. Just barely. So what I want to do is bump it just ever so slightly. I'm just going to bump it like a thousandth of an inch and see if that's enough. That's probably good enough. It slides pretty good, and it doesn't have any play in it, really. I think I'm going to call that good. That's really good. It's just about perfect. has almost no play in it at all. I mean, there's a thousandth or two play there, but not much. I think that's just right. We're going to leave it right where we're at. I need to drill 2 holes to line up with holes in my router plate. And I want to get them pretty precise. There's a machinist ways of doing this, and it just takes too long. So, close is good enough on this in this particular instance. So, I'm just going to hold that there, use my little wrench hammer, tap it down, and that marks where that hole needs to be. Yeah, that marks those holes well enough. Now I'll just come back here and mark them a little bit better. And now we're going to drill those holes over at the drill press. Basically, they just got to be in the same place that these holes are so that we can mount this to the router base. I'm drilling a smaller hole right down through the center so that we can use it to tighten up the slider here. And I'm just eyeballing this because this doesn't matter that much at all. Yeah, it's not perfectly centered, but it doesn't really have to be perfect. It's just close. And close works fine on this. You can take a larger drill bit and get rid of your burr on a hole in aluminum especially, and so that's what I'm doing. I'm just get rid of the burr there. So now we're going to thread that center hole, and we're going to put this adjustment screw in there to tighten down on the slider. Got a little 1024 tap. That's 24 threads per inch. The 10 is the size. Now, with any luck, this will thread right in there. Perfect. Well, I've got my little outfit all made up here. As you can see, this is how it works. This here you can tighten down and do fine adjustments with this. Now, this doesn't go that far. It just goes, a half an inch or whatever. Plenty of room, though. Plenty of adjustment. And then what you do is you pick a hole that you decide is that's where you're close, and that will be where you anchor, and you spin it around that anchor point. And then you can fine adjust it with that. So I've got holes every 300 thousandths of an inch. So that's really works out really good. I just used a drill bit for my pin. I had one that was broke, and it turned out it was a 5/32, and it was just about the right size for this application. And that way, when you drill it with a 5/32 hole, there's not much slop, and yet the drill goes right in there perfectly. So this should work really good. Now, my idea is you drill a hole right in the center where you want it, all the way through your top, and this 5/32 hole. And you also drill a hole right into another board so that this pin can sit down in that other board pretty good, and it won't wobble around too much. And then you drop it through here, see, whichever one you want, and then you just route around there. And keep in mind, this is going to be fairly close in. This is about a 2-inch hole, or a 2-inch radius right there, so there's a 4-inch hole. It's actually a little under that, but just give you an idea. And a 4-inch hole is kind of standard. So it'll go bigger, but it won't go much smaller than about a 4-inch, which is plenty good. So I think we're about ready to give this thing a shot. Before we get too far along, I want to just kind of draw in what I'm going to do on this top. So there's 2 inches. I'm going to make my circle, instead of making it a 4-inch opening, I'm going to make it an 1/8 bigger, so that's a 1/16 of an inch all the way around. So 1/8 inch across. So I'm going to make it a 4 1/8 inch diameter hole. Now, even before I do that, I want to precisely locate the center. I've already got the center approximated here, but I want to get down here close and make sure I get the... So that's my center right there. And now I will put the little compass in there. Okay, that's my center. That's going to be the size of the hole. Just a slightly oversized hole, not very much oversized, so that it won't really look out of place or different. Now we just have to decide where we want and how far out we want these other pieces. This first ring, it looks like it's going to naturally work out to be about, oh, I don't know, what is that, a 5/16 inside of that? And that's probably good. Yeah, I think we'll just call it 5/16 and bigger. And so what I'll do then is just set this on here and just go 5/16 bigger. There's a quarter bigger, and there's 5/16, or almost. That will be the, now this will be the inside mark of the next circle, hopefully. So that'll be the inside. I know these lines are pretty light. You probably can't see them very good. Okay, so that'll be the inside edge of this next circle. And I'm just going to use the thickness of this to be my guide. So roughly right here would be the next circle. So, okay, so that thin circle gets cut out entirely. So let's see then, what would we do about this? Well, that didn't work out so good. I was wanting to leave a little space in between each one of these. Wow. My idea was to put this one on this mark. That's good I'm drawing them out, because it sure didn't work out like I was expecting. That would probably work okay. I don't know if this one's going to work. I don't know if I can stretch this puppy. Doggone. May have to be that I can probably stretch it to the outside diameter of the one I've got drawn there. Maybe. I'm not sure I can even do that without breaking it. It's very stiff. It's old, actually. Might have to drop back 5 and punt on this again. Well, I hope this will make sense to you now. Obviously, this first intersection out to this first line will be the hole. Then there's approximately a 1/16 of an inch, or a little more maybe, to the first inside edge of the first rosette part. Then there'll be another 1/16 of an inch or so. Then there'll be the wide band here, and then another 1/16 of an inch or so, and then the last thin band. So there'll be wood, purfling, wood, purfling, wood, purfling, and then the final wood out here. So it looks pretty good. That looks like that's going to be doable with what I have here. So obviously I'm going to practice this before I start committing anything to this. And we'll practice this on a piece of scrap, and just to see how well it's going to work. I've got a backer board here that's just, I know it's real flat because I used it to calibrate my thickness sander. I drilled a pilot hole through here, and I've got a piece of spruce here that is basically the same material that we're using, so that'll be good. I've drawn the furthest outside circle on here. Then I'm going to line this up. I've already adjusted it to a certain degree. I mean, it's just adjusted by eye, to be honest with you. And now we're going to just turn it on, and I've already got the depth set too. I think that should be right. And let's see how well it works. Well, that should be representative of the outermost, the outside of the biggest hole. And you know, it looks like that's going to work just fine. It's going to leave a gap up here, but that's okay. The fretboard extension will cover that. At least it's supposed to. And now the only problem is that the slot's not big enough. Well, I just measured the slot, and sure enough, it works out to 61 thousandths. It was a 1/16th bit, which should be 64 thousandths, so we're real close. So that's working out pretty good. This stuff measures 80 thousandths. Actually, probably a hair more, 82 or 3 thousandths. 20 thousandths bigger is about what I need. You know, I'd like to be able to mark that on there, 20 thousandths on this, and slide it out 20 thousandths is what I'd like to do. Or slide it in 20 thousandths actually, because we're starting on the outside. We've got the 20 thousandths blade here. If I lay that on here, alright, so I've got the 20 thousandths there, and I'm going to scribe it with the aluminum on the aluminum. And now what I can do is pull this in 20 thousandths, tighten it down real good, and then we should be, then I just have to line it back up with the right hole, which should be real close to where it was. Now if we try it again, hopefully. Okay, that looks real good. I just hope it's as good as it looks. Like a glove. Fits like a glove. Well, that test went so well that I'm not going to bother testing any further. Maybe I should, but I think I can handle it from this point on. So we're just going to go ahead and give it a shot. Here's the real thing on here. I believe I have this reset to the proper place. I'm going to just get it back on the right pin. There, it looks like it's lined up. So I think we're good to go. Here we go. Well, that looks real nice. Certainly feels better than doing it on the drill press. I can tell you that much for sure. Now I've got my line back on here, so I think I should be able to just line it right back up. And just to be it safe, I'll double check it, but I'm pretty sure I've got it right where I want it. Okay, I'm tightening it down as tight as I can get it with my fingers, and that seems to be good enough. And try to make a habit of always turning it on and off right here on this end, because the fretboard will cover anything that would happen while you're doing that, because that's when it can jump or bounce or something. That really looks good. It's about as good as you could ever want something to be like that. Alright, so now here's the moment of truth. Does it fit in here? Might even be just a fraction loose. But I think it'll be fine. And it's not bad on the depth and everything else. Okay, so let's go ahead and move it on in for the next one. I think because I've got the little tiny bit on there, I'll go ahead and do the inside circle next. So we know already that we need to move it in 20 thousandths. So we'll put this on here and mark 20 thousandths again. Yeah, it looks like there's a little bump right there. I'm going to go back. While I've got it set, I'm going to go back around there just to make sure. So here's the smaller one. Let's see if it fits the hole now. Looks like it's going to go, but it's going to be tight. Huh. May have to cut some off of that one. Okay, well that's alright. If I have to cut it off, that's not a big deal. But it looks like it's going to work. So I don't want to chip anything out, so I'm going to leave that alone. Now we just have to make this one fit in here, and I think that's going to be doable too. Now this one's going to be a little trickier because it's so much wider. I'm trying to decide if I want to go to a bigger bit, and I think I do. If I do it with an 1/8, I could probably get it in 3 passes. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I'm going to go with the 1/8 inch because I can get that middle one out in 3 passes, I think. At least that's the hope. So here we go. Well, I've got the big bit mounted, everything's tight. I think we're ready to give it a shot and see what happens. Well, what I did there was a total screw up, but it's okay. I'll be honest, I completely looked at the wrong mark. That's the inside of the hole. But I cut it in the right place. Whew, I'm just glad it was a good mistake. So I'll have to go deeper on that later and cut. That's where I want the hole. Thank goodness, I just screwed up. That's all I can tell you. I don't know what I did, but I just screwed up. But at least it's an okay screw up. It about choked on it there when I was routing it because I was thinking I screwed up big time. Now I'm going to double, triple, quadruple check this one because I can't afford another screw up. That would be really terrible. You know, that's it right there. I'm pretty sure I got it where I want it this time. Just look. I don't know. I looked away and I went back to it and I went to the wrong place. But at least it's a good mistake. Like I said, it's not even a screw up. It's just that I didn't do what I was expecting to do at the right time. So, but otherwise it's fine. It won't be a problem. That's real good. That's real good. Okay, so now we got to bring it in quite a bit. If I bring it in 100,000ths of an inch, that would be just about right. Overlap just a little bit of the cut that we had already. There it is right there. That's the hole I want. I just want to double, triple check. Okay, we're good. Okay, so here we go again. Okay, so now we're cooking with gas. The hole's pretty wide, but it's not wide enough yet. We're going to have to widen it a little bit more yet. I think the way I'm going to choose to do that is set this in there like so. Make sure my pencil is incredibly sharp. Take my pencil, make it mark as tight as I can make it. And I'll lay this on here and bring it back to that mark. I believe that's going to do it right there. I'll cut it up here on the place where it won't show, and we'll test it first before we do anything else. Okay, we're going to test that just to make sure that it's the right width. And wow, it looks real good. Looks real good. Just looking at it like that, I'm going, oh, that looks bad. But when I put this down there, it's just perfect. So we're going to call that good. Whew. It scared me when I first looked at it. I thought, boy, that looks way too big. Okay, here we go. Our final pass around this, I think. Well, I think that's as good as it can be done. The last thing I guess I'll do is go ahead and cut the hole all the way through. No point in leaving the hole there. That was the mistake I made, but we'll fix that right now. Okay, I got her marked in the right spot. Now I'm just going to bring this on down 100,000ths, which is the thickness of the top. Just thought I'd show you how I go about getting this accurate depth, which is very important. You know, this tool here, this caliper, it has the stick out here, and you can stick that out 100,000ths of an inch, which is the thickness of the top, and lock it down. That's what I did. Now I'm going to push that down. I'm going to push the blade back in till it hits that 100,000ths mark. And that's it right there. Tighten it up a little bit. Double check myself to make sure I didn't screw that up. It looks real good. And now I will actually physically test the depth. Just doing the same thing basically, but this time I'm actually measuring how deep I have the blade set, and to see if I came out to 102 or 3 thousandths. That'll be perfect for what we're doing here. And now we just need to get back in that same first hole that, like I said, the screw up hole, but thank goodness it screwed it up in the right place. That should have cut all the way through, probably didn't. I don't think that's a bad thing. I could probably cut it, yeah, you can see where it just kind of poked through in a place or two. So that's fine, that's just a paper thin deal, and I can cut that the rest of it with an X-Acto knife. And I really wanted it to be like that in a way. I didn't really want to go through too deep. Although it probably wouldn't have hurt if I'd have just went ahead and gone a little deeper. So we'll just go ahead and cut that out. I'm going to cut like paper because it's just really thin. Okay, that worked just fine. So there you have it, friends and neighbors. We have a hole and a rosette cut. Now let's get the rosette glued in before anything chips anything out. This big rosette's going to fit tight, I can tell that. Maybe a hair too tight for putting it in here, but we're going to make it happen. So here we go. I just hope nothing splits. The last thing that we need to do is to clean up this sound hole, but it's a little wet, so I'm not going to do too much right now, but I am going to just knock off some of the fuzz right now. Well, that's looking pretty darn fine. Here's what she looks like up close, folks. Can't hardly beat it. It worked out just about as good as it could ever want. My little new invention tool is just worth its weight in gold for that. I think that's going to be enough for the first installment of this video series. I hope you've enjoyed it up to this point. The second installment will probably be putting the braces on this, is what we'll start off with. I'm going to want to get the braces on here pretty quickly because I don't want the top to start warping or moving or anything like that. So that'll be the next thing that we do.